Joining us now, Brennan Center for Justice Senior Advisor Barton Gellman and New York Times opinion columnist David French. So, David, I'm going to start with you because you're the one not in studio with us. Who might Donald Trump want to put around him that it would be hard to get security clearance for? I remember back in the first administration, this was a big problem with Jared Kushner.
Yeah, it's any number of people. It's take your pick. What we're dealing with here is a crank coalition that is surrounding around Donald Trump right now. And cranks tend to not do as well on background checks. And so you've also got an awful lot of people around him who participated to some degree in the January 6th plot. You've got people who have served prison time, who are Trump loyalists as well. So, I don't think we could pinpoint any one person, but we absolutely know, and we can see from the people who surround him, he is building a crank coalition, especially in that core inner circle. And if he's going to have the people around him that he wants to do his will, then some of these guys are going to have to find a way around the typical FBI background check process. So none of this surprises me at all.
Crank coalition, Bart. What is the FBI background check? What's traditionally done? What are the things that get flagged? What are they trying to avoid or prevent against when you're getting someone a security clearance?
Well, just to start off with, if you're applying for a security clearance, you have to fill out a 136-page form called the SF-86, which asks you everywhere you've lived, everywhere you've worked, every foreign entanglement you've had, all the way down a long list. And an important thing is that there are criminal penalties for filling that out incorrectly. You swear before an officer of the United States that you're telling the truth fully and completely. And so what they want to find is, do you have potentially corrupt motives for something that might relate to your job? Could you be blackmailed for something? Do you have out-of-balance spending patterns? Are you beholden to some foreign company or a foreign country? I mean, take Jared Kushner. He's had nearly $3 billion of investment money put in his hands by the governments of Saudi Arabia and a couple of its neighbors. And that gives them enormous leverage over him. That would make it even harder for him to get a clearance. And he didn't get a clearance last time until Donald Trump just overrode the objections of the career officers who were in charge of that.
And the president has the authority to do that. It makes me think of an interview that J.D. Vance did with Jake Tapper yesterday. And Tapper was trying to get J.D. Vance, David, to explain why all of these very senior people around Donald Trump have come out and said the guy's a fascist, or he has fascist tendencies. He's dangerous. He's not the person you want in the Oval Office. He's not responsible. And J.D. Vance says one of the ways he pushed back on this, and there were many ways, but one of the ways was to say that John Kelly and Mattis and Milley, all these people have this worldview that's not in line with Donald Trump's. They want to go to war while Donald Trump wants to be at peace. And I wonder if that was actually much more revealing. Donald Trump wants people around him who will say yes to whatever he says. And it's not maybe that John Kelly or Mattis or Milley, didn't agree with his worldview. They just didn't follow through with the things that Donald Trump was asking them to do when they broke the law.
When Kelly and Mattis and others were selected to join the administration, MAGA pointed to them and said, look, see, Donald Trump isn't erratic. Donald Trump, he's within the norms of American politics. What are you so afraid of? These very, very respected people want to work for him. And that was the line right until these very, very respected people actually saw him operate up close and said, this guy is erratic. This guy is dangerous. And then they became the problem. And this is the pattern constantly with Trump. He will praise and he will surround himself with people and as long as they are loyal to him. And then the instant they see him up close, the instant they see him operate and recoil from it, well, they were bad all along. And that's just the same kind of tired line. J.D. Vance adds the extra kind of malicious twist, which is to basically say, well, if I disagree with Donald Trump, I'm some kind of warmonger. I want people to go to war. I want there to be more conflict in the world. And that's just slander. That's just completely wrong. But it's a way to inoculate the MAGA public against these critiques. It's a way to say you don't have to listen to these people because these people just want war. It's slander. It's horrible. But unfortunately, it works with an awful lot of people.
Bart, last time you and I had a long conversation was surrounding a piece you did for The Atlantic ahead of the last election. And a lot of what you were warning against came to be. I mean, a lot of the timing of when Donald Trump would need to push back, the January 6th stuff, it didn't get as apocalyptic as you were warning it could have gotten. But now you have a new piece about this next election, and you say there's some of the reporting in there that wasn't quite right. Some of the assumptions you made about what could happen was not quite right. Explain.
So look, 4 years ago, before the election, I said Donald Trump is not going to concede defeat if he loses. Not for any reason, under any circumstances.
You were right.
He will fight to overturn the election as hard as he can. And I predicted a number of the things that he might try to do. And the crucial point that I was wrong about is that I thought the system might not hold, that we'd never had that kind of challenge before. And we might not know what to do with it. Democracy might not know how to defend itself. And now, having gone around and done a lot of interviews with a lot of state officials around the country and federal officials, I am convinced that this democracy can defend itself. I'm certain that if Trump doesn't win, he will again try to overturn the election. He has even more motive this time with a lot of pending criminal charges. If he doesn't get elected, but I believe the system will hold.
So you're optimistic?
I'm optimistic that whoever wins the popular vote in each state is going to get that state's electors, and that the electors will be seated, they'll be recognized in Congress, and basically the winner of the election will get sworn in on January 20th.
All right, Bart Gellman, really good to have you. Nice to see you. David French, thank you as well.